Welcome. You're on The Fringe Show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to navigate the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here we talk about technology, startups, and mental models of successful people so that you too can increase the odds of your success and take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. Today, we're talking about what's inside the minds of high achievers. So this episode will probably resonate most with entrepreneurs and professionals. If you want to be a high achiever, if you want to be truly legendary and kind of super performer in business or any other professional field, or maybe in sports field, then probably this episode is for you. Let me remind you, it's a live show, so please allow Facebook firstly to identify you so that you can show your name and I know who is here, and you can also ask me questions, comment as we go along in this show. Let me see who is here. Maybe I can see some familiar names. Well, not yet, but hopefully people will join. So let me start with three examples. One of them is coming from the blockchain space that I'm very familiar with, and it's about Vitalik Buterin. In 2014, when he was still a teenager, he wrote the famous Ethereum white paper. Ethereum is the second largest cryptocurrency and also crypto network. And you can think of Ethereum as decentralized kind of computer or computing platform for decentralized applications. Another way of thinking about Ethereum is just like maybe computer for decentralized applications and programmable money. That's another way of thinking about it. It started really small, but now Ethereum, which is the second largest crypto network, is worth something like $220 billion the last time I looked at it. Another example is from the Collinson brothers. Patrick and John were two young people when just over, not quite teenagers, but they were still very young when they started Stripe, which is one of the largest payment systems. In 2016, they became the youngest self-made billionaires, and Stripe's market capitalization now is around $100 billion. The founders have a super ambitious mission, which is to increase the GDP of the internet. So that's another little example. And the third example is from my personal experience in 2008. I interviewed Mike Cannon-Brookes, who is co-founder of Atlassian, which is arguably the most successful high-tech company in Australia. What was interesting about Mike and his co-founder Scott is they started straight out of college. They didn't seek any external financing. Most of their development was through internal financing, and they started with credit card debt. And eventually they listed on NASDAQ, and now the company is worth something around $67 billion. Quite a remarkable story itself. Now, what do you think is the kind of the common thread here? Let me see who is here. Okay, hello, Gaia. Hello. Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for joining. Yeah, great topic. Yes, I think so too. The startup universe, what we see here, well, you may say, okay, they're very young, the founders were young, maybe they're male, clearly, but what else is so different or uniting about them? And that's because the startup universe is governed by the power law distribution. We are all familiar with the famous bell curve, people. There are lots of average people. There are high performers and lower performers. But this is not how the world works. In fact, if you look at many spheres of human endeavor, it may be wealth creation, startup valuations, venture capital returns, it may be hedge fund returns, it may be YouTube stars' income, the size of cities and corporations, human performance, athletic performance, academic publications, and the list goes on and on and on. In those kind of spheres, the bell curve does not, the normal distribution does not apply. We're facing here a power law distribution. And by power law, we mean that a small percentage of people or corporations, or whatever the case might be, command most of them wealth, and they're super achievers and performers. Then there is a significant proportion of average performers, and also a little bit of a tail of poor performance, but that portion is not very big. The biggest one is the average performers. And the interesting question to ask here is, what differentiates these high performers from all the others? And it's almost a truism to think that they need to think different. Yeah, these people definitely think different. But what does it really mean? And this is exactly what we're going to explore in today's episode. And perhaps the best way of looking at it is coming from the world of investment. Howard Marks, a famous investor and also an author, once remarked that in investment, you only make money if you are non-consensus right. It's a mouthful, so let me unpack it a little bit. What it means is that if you are wrong about the market, you obviously don't make money, you lose money. If you are right about the market, but the mainstream also thinks exactly the way you do, you'll probably make a little bit of money, but your returns will be average. If you really want to make money, you need to be non-consensus, so that's not what the mainstream thinks, and you need to be right at the same time. And all these kind of the opportunities that arise for these super high performers are obviously not obvious to anyone else. And that's a tautology, but probably a very appropriate one. Also, it's important to realize that simply being a contrarian is not enough. You need to have some kind of a fresh, fundamental insight into your opportunity. And if you look at all what the world of business is filled with, it's all about how-tos and prescriptions and best practices and 7 steps and 3 ways of doing things, then habits of successful people, and the list goes on and on and on. Well, these things are useful, but they're important only for certain basics. If you really want to be outstanding, you need to engage in what Howard Marks and others call second-level thinking. You can versus first-level thinking. You can think of second-level thinking. If you ever play chess, this is what good chess players do. Not only do they anticipate their own move or maybe 1 second move from the opponent, but they have a very holistic picture of what's going on. And they're also trying to predict, of course, what they're doing, what the opponent will do in 10 moves, and so on and so forth. So it's a very holistic and very different thinking. You can also think or train yourself or educate yourself to think holistically. And this is just by really asking yourself a series of questions. Questions like, what's the probability I'm right? What does the mainstream think, the consensus think? Is the consensus right? Maybe that's in some unimportant things there may be, but what will be the value of my idea, and if this second level thinking is right? In the world that we live in, fortunately or unfortunately, the proportion of second level thinkers is very, very small. Most people are first level thinkers, which is good news for second level thinkers. One of the interesting examples here come from Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is co-founder of PayPal. He's also an investor in Stripe. He's supporter of Vitalik Buterin, and he was also one of the very first investors in Facebook, which made him very, very rich. And what he has this question, which is very often referred to as in the startup universe as the Peter Thiel question. And the question goes something like that. Tell me, what is it, the fundamental truth that you know, that X is right, yet everybody believes that Y is right. So tell me something, tell me your secret. And one example of that would be Steve Jobs in 2001 when he released iPod. To everyone else, to all the market analysts, well, they said, okay, iPod, well, it's kind of a trinket and a nice addition to Macintosh, but what's the big deal? What, of course, they didn't realize, and that was Steve Jobs' little secret, is that or big secret rather, that the world was moving from, this ecosystem was shifting from PCs and desktops to mobile. And he wanted iPod to be one of the first devices in this new generation of mobile on-the-move devices. That was a really, really big insight, and that was not obvious to market analysts and others. If you're a startup and if you're pitching your ideas, say we are an Uber for massages or Airbnb for cats, it's very likely that you're not applying second level rather principles, because, well, it's kind of an idea that can be copied and replicated by everybody else. You probably will be reasonably successful in what you're doing if your execution is right, but you're unlikely to generate all these outsized returns and create value, not just for yourself, but also create value for the customer and for the society. A very related concept to this contrarian second level thinking is what we call first principles thinking. The first principles thinking is a way of thinking which is as old as. It was applied by Asian philosophers, and it's very popular amongst entrepreneurs. It's simply a very basic, foundational and self-evident assumption that cannot be deduced or deducted or inferred from anything else. It's something really basic, really fundamental. Most of the people, when they go along in their lives, they're thinking by analogy, and that's perfectly fine. We're drawing on our experiences and what we did before, and we are kind of replicating it as well, looking at other people. There's nothing wrong with this because it's just really fast. But if you want to come up with and if you want to stick to incremental ideas, incremental innovations, incremental things in your life, that's a way to go. It's useful. However, if you want to come up with breakthrough ideas, then you need to think definitely different. You need to be thinking from first principles. And one of the best examples here is Elon Musk himself, who says that, well, he applies the rules of physics, of fundamental physics, to understanding whatever problem he's got to solve. And an example is when he was going to launch SpaceX, the original idea was very, very different. He wanted to buy all these rockets in the open market. So he went out and asked the open market how much it was, and the quote was $65 million. It was a lot of money, and Elon Musk decided, no, we're not going to do with that, to go with this. And when eventually Falcon, the first rocket, was launched, it cost them only $7 million. So the question is, how did they come up with this breakthrough innovation? And this is what Elon Musk explains himself. Let me quote him. He said that I'm applying first principles thinking and this approach to really big problems, that kind of problems. So I said, okay, let's look at the first principles. What is a rocket made of? Aerospace-grade aluminium alloys, plus some titanium, copper, and carbon fiber. And then I asked, what's the value of those materials on the commodity market? It turned out that the materials cost of a rocket was about 2% of the typical price, which is a crazy ratio for a large mechanical product. When you can also train yourself, teach yourself to be a first principle thinker just by asking yourself a few fundamental questions. For example, why do I think this? What are the underlying assumptions that I have? Why do you think this is true? How can I back it up? What's the evidence? What are the sources of this evidence? What if I'm wrong? So it's a very much Socratic principle of questioning whatever problem you are facing. Let me maybe give you a couple of examples from Stripe, how they came, what kind of the first principles thinkers they were, and what kind of fresh insights and secrets they had in their startup. One of the secrets, and probably I should say that these secrets don't have to be rocket science. Sometimes they're very, very simple things, but nobody else notices them. Nobody else has got the perception to absorb what's going on in the environment. And one of the observations that they had, that one of their secrets, is that growth in e-commerce was outpacing the payment system. Let me give you a quote from Patrick Collinson himself, so that I don't have to paraphrase how they thought and what's their words. What we did discover pretty quickly was that the hardest part of starting an internet business isn't coming up with an idea, turning the idea into code, or getting people to hear about it and pay for it. The hardest part was finding a way to accept customers' money. You could share a photograph on Facebook, but you couldn't move money around in the same way. It felt like you were in the dark ages. And this is what there was, very simple insight, but not obvious to anyone else. The other one from them, example coming from them, is that big companies can't turn capital into good software. If you look at any big company, what have they got? They've got money, they've got buildings, they've got fleet of cars, they've got human talent, they've got their infrastructure, and yet they cannot really write very good code. If you go to a website of any big company, you'll probably notice that links don't work, that animations don't work, that something is broken, the bot doesn't understand what you're talking about, and if you're using chatbot, and so on and so forth. And this was their insight, saying, well, if they can't do that, we as a small company can, and we don't even have to invest a lot in marketing. Or we can when we become successful, but not at the beginning. And that was an insight for them as well. And a good question to ask yourself, if you're an entrepreneur, maybe a professional, what is this secret that I have? Another interesting way of thinking about it is, well, what's the raw material for these mental models and breakthrough ideas? And none of those ideas come from a single discipline, from a narrow vertical understanding of the world. Say, if you're an economist, you will be just an economist, you will be applying this economic lens to solving just about any problem. So your approach to the problem will be very much one-sided. You need to have a range of different mental models from different disciplines. It can be psychology, history, mathematics, and physics, and art, and maybe physiology, biology, and so on. And then, and only then, you can produce something that has more value than just the sum of its parts. If we look at the three examples that I've given you, Vitalik is a very talented programmer, but he's also a self-taught economist. Mike and Scott, they finished a double degree in IT and business. The Collinson brothers, yes, they are very good programmers as well, but Patrick is also an incredibly wide-read individual, and he writes on topics that have nothing to do with Stripe, and his insights are quite brilliant. He is into history and philosophy and engineering and art and technology, of course. And his advice has always been to young people in particular and entrepreneurs, go deep on things, become an expert in something, and in particular, go deep on many, many different things. A very good question that you can ask yourself is, well, why are there so few original thinkers? I wonder what you think about it. Why are there so few, say, unicorns? Why do we have this power law distribution when winners take all or most, and the rest of us don't take a lot? Yeah, just average. Well, most people, I answer my own question. Most people are conformists. They haven't learned how to think for themselves. They follow the crowd. The next big thing, the latest management fad, the latest hack, the rules of life or habits of successful people, whatever. So they mimic the behavior of what others are doing. There is a French-American philosopher who used to be a professor at Stanford, who came up with a theory of mimetic desire. And what he said is that human behavior is pretty much a lot of mimicry. We don't know as humans what we actually desire, what we want, and therefore we're trying to imitate what the others want, so mimetic desire. And that's a very incrementalist view of the world. It emphasizes all these rules and procedures and routines and best practices and outcompeting others as if competing like crazy is something to be lauded. And Patrick Collinson advises young entrepreneurs in particular to think for themselves. And let me give you here his quote again, which I think is quite profound, and you may find it interesting as well. This is what he said about having courage to think for yourself. Nobody is going to teach you how to think for yourself. A large fraction of what people around you believe is mistaken. Internalize this and practice coming up with your own worldview. Let me stop here and just maybe have a little bit of a digression. There are lots of myths perpetuated in our society which are fundamentally not true. And one that's particularly popular for whatever reason in the business world is about hard work. Now, if you work hard, hustle, that will lead you somewhere, it won't lead you anywhere. That's probably a topic for new conversation altogether. But there are many, many myths like that, and they simply don't work. They won't get you anywhere. There are lots of, coming back to Patrick Collinson, there are lots of forces that will push you towards following train tracks laid by others rather than sharing a course, or rather than charting a course yourself. Make sure that the things you're pursuing are weird things that you want to pursue, not whatever standard path is. Let me stop here as well, because I think it's a fundamental statement. It's a very kind of statement full of truth, at least for me. What he's saying is these things have to be weird things. Everybody else is thinking you're crazy. They have to be out of the realm of possibility. You and everybody else think that they're just nuts pursuing all these things. Don't share them with anyone, because our society will tell you that there is no way you can do it. So keep it to yourself, I would say. I think it's probably time to kind of wind up, unless my viewers have some questions right now. But I want to finish with a couple of practical takeaways for you. And these were certainly some takeaways that I learned as well, some lessons learned. It's important, I guess, to surround yourself with people who have different perspectives. Even though these perspectives may be wrong, or at least you can look at them and say, well, what if I'm wrong? Yeah. So try to explore, try to ask yourself all these questions. Use social networks as an indicator of what the consensus thinking is. This is certainly what I do. And whenever my thinking starts to be very much like the mainstream, that's the time for me to pause and reflect. Another one is, yeah, thank you, Ian. Great. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. Another lesson that I'll take away for myself is that you need to be very selective about who you're interacting with. Run away from experts who offer you all these recipes, prescriptions, 5 easy steps, 3 easy steps, whatever is the latest fad. Because if you want to be truly legendary in your field, a truly high achiever, you really need a different approach. Now, don't take this at a face value, because sometimes what I found, there is underneath these prescriptions that look like prescriptions and how-tos, there are some fundamental truths. But it's not very easy to differentiate between the two, between what I call prescriptions and truths. One way I've found for myself that works for me is to look at the source. Who is sending the message? Are the people or person, him or her, are they sincere? Are they really authentic? Are they serious about the message that they're sending? And then my bet is that it's probably not a prescription. It's more of a fundamental assumption about how things work. Another thing is that I really have found works for myself is that we all need to examine our limited beliefs. We need to be honest with ourselves. We need to ask the question, where do we want to be? And if you're not there as a professional who wants to be legendary, who wants to be a super achiever, then you need to ask yourself the question, why am I not there? And that's why we need to examine all things that stand in our way. It may be our misconceptions about money, business, your own industry, relationships, whatever the case might be. So I hope you found this episode interesting. You learned how some of the truly remarkable people, super performers, think. Maybe you can apply a lot of that in your own thinking, in your own life. And remember, there are not that many second-level thinkers or first-principle thinkers. So if you do master these principles, you will be at a huge competitive advantage. Thank you for joining. Let me see if there are any comments left. Yeah, no. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, all my viewers, all my listeners. Thank you for joining. I shall see you on the Fringe Show again next Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. Let's now play a little bit of music.